Well, how Hunter chilling to do? I'm so glad that Hunter to join. We one more again for zooming in on sustainability. This year, the Queen Quet, head upon the body of the Gullah Geechee Nation. I'm so glad that Hunter chilling to tune in this year, Black August. So happy Black August to all of Hunter chilling out on anything like that. And you know, even though it's a Black August, I thought it's a good time for we have a little biracial kind of program and thing like that, because it's important for we zoom in on this shit thing called racism. People are talking about not being just racist. You had them to talk about being anti-racist and things like that. Well, what is race? We could crack we teeth but that at a day. So as Queen Quet, head upon the body of the Gullah Geechee Nation, this your important topic to we and thing like that. But you know, we never just start off this your broadcast dry long. So we have to take some time for first pay homage to we ancestors. We ancestors that been enslaved, instead of them cracky teeth for who them drew for true, the Igbo, the Mandinka, Malinke, Yoruba, Gullah, Geechee, Mendi, Temni, Fiki, baby, and thing like that. This your construct called racism had them stripped a name and thing like that, and the way cracky teeth like this year. So that's why plenty of Hunter children now yet we the cracky teeth like this year in the Gullah Geechee Nation now from Jacksonville, North Kakalaki to Jacksonville, Florida, because of this your system we the top of dismantling the day. So before we get going, we want to pay homage to we ancestors. This your Black August, who been called Black Gold. Some may make them through the Middle Passage, and the other rest been upon this your land where we to stand today, dismantling racism. So let we take a moment of silence. Ashe, ashe, ashe. I also want to acknowledge at this moment the families who lost folks the past couple of days. We've been dealing with a tropical storm that turned, well, it went from a tropical storm to a hurricane, and then back to a tropical storm, and then back to a hurricane. It seemed that it made that journey. I see us that passed by most of the Gullah Geechee Nation, but didn't pass by all of the Gullah Geechee Nation. In fact, it made landfall in the North Carolina portion of the Gullah Geechee Nation. And so we're still yet getting reports. There was some flooding in the Myrtle Beach area, Little River area of South Carolina, and then going across, of course, into North Carolina section of the Gullah Geechee Nation. So our prayers are with everybody who are recovering right now from this. And I know all of us are, because whenever there's a hurricane or tropical storm, there has a lot of psychological weight to it. And so people are trying to kind of get back in pace. So can you imagine the pressures of dealing with a natural disaster in the midst of a pandemic? You see? So now if you take on that thought, you take on that weight right now of what you might feel by me even mentioning these two things simultaneously. Let me add one more: climate change, sea level rise, too much heat, as they call it now, pre-existing conditions. Let's think about all of that together. Now let's also think about being profiled just because you are Black gold, just because you are richness, just because you look like this or similar to this. You have some hue or tone in your skin that makes somebody else get incensed when they see you, get upset when they see you, get jealous, hateful, and envious when they see you, to the point that they would do all they could to spiritually and physically kneel on your neck to choke out your life force while you're already dealing with all of the aforementioned things. Now, how much pressure you think that might be? I would think that that's enough pressure that would be reminiscent of being put in the belly of the beast, and then to balance out the ship, you have to carry stones on called ballasts, and now put them in places where they've already sold off or murdered off some of the so-called black cargo. And now when you get to this final marketplace, you're told to also hoist this up and carry this off. And now you actually pave streets, pave roads into streets in a place you never saw before, far away from where you originally were, happily with your family, happily in your village, happily in your community, to only be displaced from one place to be placed in a new place and then have your cultural heritage denied in this new place because somebody decided they would take you from the village you were in with all of its unique abilities and try to melt you into a pot. And then if you didn't melt well, because, you know, if y'all were like me as a little girl, and still now, I don't eat ice cream usually now at all because I'm a vegetarian. However, as a little girl, when I ate ice cream, I did not like Neapolitan ice cream because they always had these 3 flavors in there, and I only wanted the chocolate one. And so what I would have to do is, if they made me, if they scraped the whole 3 flavors in the bowl, I would sit there and I would churn it 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 until it all looked like one thing. So when we talk about the great American melting pot, that's been this failed process of trying to melt all the people in one pot and take away their uniqueness, take away who they're going to be even when they crack your teeth and things like that, take away language, take away tradition, take away culture, to say we're this melting pot. Well, that pot has boiled over. It's gotten hot, it's burnt, but it didn't cook anything really good. As part of the ingredients that went in that pot was what we're here to talk about today: racism. Part of constructing the recipe for America was to make sure that there would be a system that denied that the very Africans that carried the weight of the colonies on their back and laid the cornerstone for the country would not be discussed. They wouldn't be given any credit. We'll exploit them. We'll exploit their physical bodies. We'll exploit their mental abilities. We'll exploit their scientific knowledge. We'll exploit everything possible down to the women that will produce more children, but we won't give them credit. This was put in that pot. That pot got hot because the racism was the fire that kept it blazing, kept it blazing, kept it blazing. That if you don't look like me, you don't sound like me, you won't conform to what I tell you to conform to, I'm going to try to beat it out of you. And if I can't finish beating it out of you, maybe I'll just eliminate you altogether. I'll do genocidal things to eliminate you, starting with profiling you. I'll do studies on you and write books and say it's because of the way your nose is that you can't speak like me. Look, I ain't gonna try for crack my teeth like Hunter and thing like that. It's me on time. You write things about the women, the shapeliness of their bodies and what that can do, but how they're not a human. They're 3/5 of one. You turn the men into chattel that you want to treat like cattle because you want them to sear the other ones. You call them bucks and this kind of thing. All of this is part of the whole system that was constructed to attempt to make it seem that white people were supreme and people of African descent were not, and that we were inferior and that white people, Anglo people, were superior. Never true. Never true. It was never true. But it was built and upheld by certain pillars that allowed people to walk into it, learn all about it in school, and become the automatons that would try to keep the system running. So when we start talking about racism, yes, it's systemic. Yes, it's real. And we're going to talk about how did it come to being constructed in the first place? How did we get to talking about there's a white race and a black race? What is that about? When we talk about white privilege, well, really? Well, how come they have a privilege that everybody else don't have? How did that happen? How did that get built in? So I thought that at such a time as this for Black August, and as we are just leaving out of the Gullah Geechee Nation Appreciation Week celebration that was very successful, and we thank all of you who celebrated with us and are still supporting our human right to self-determination here in the Gullah Geechee Nation, I would bring on someone that I have dialogued about this issue with over a couple generations now, it feels like it's been about a generation that we connected when she was a college student. And now she is Dr. Melissa Hargrove, who is a college professor who was once teaching here in the Gullah Geechee Nation down in Jacksonville, and then went back up to her alma mater, the University of Tennessee. She's taught about whiteness, but you can't teach about whiteness without teaching about race. And she's done a lot of field work here in the Gullah Geechee Nation that she cried about literally and figuratively. And interestingly enough, all her tears couldn't wipe away what her own folks ended up calling her. And I was in shock when I read her thesis, her doctoral thesis, and her opening chapter was entitled Race Traitor. We're back to that word again, race. So we're going to discuss race up in this place. I hope y'all ready, all right, about how it was constructed, and anything that's constructed can be deconstructed, right? You put it on the mantle, we can dismantle it. Like them statues that just came down, people still mad about. So, Dr. Hargrove, I'm so happy to have you here and so glad for see her and things like that. How the body, how honored to do?
Doing wonderful. Doing good, feeling good, family's good, everything is good. This is so, as you always say, you know, God didn't mean it for evil, he meant it for good. And it's amazing that we would talk about this today. I have the privilege of teaching a course in African history at UT. And today was our wrap up of that course. Those students that I've never met, we've been completely virtual. So I've tried to do more things to really engage them. But this term, I really wanted to connect African history with the African diaspora and let them see that all of the things that you've seen that have been so amazing to you are the same things that the Portuguese and the Spanish and all of the colonizers saw when they came to Africa. And I think the kingdoms that they had created in 10,000 years, all over the continent, the pastoral brilliance of the way that they manipulate their own cultural environment and ecology to make a cultural system that will sustain them. I think those things scared white people so much that they knew there had to be a system in place that would never allow this history to be told, even to the Africans themselves. I have a student who's African, and she wrote in her first paper about being from Africa and never having known that it was the birthplace of humanity, that it was the
that is deep. So actually being from the continent and not learning that.
It was all animals were domesticated. It's where humans started walking upright, learning to hunt, learning to make tools, and they pushed, everyone is African. Everyone comes from Africa. And so we all have a vested interest in the validation and the right to attribute all of this knowledge, especially in the South. The South is basically West African cosmology pushed through this mesh of white supremacy. Everything you do as a tourist in all of those coastal cities, everything you want to get when you're there is from the Gullah Geechee.
Now, isn't that deep that you would say that? Now see where you went, because let's go there. All right, let's lay this out, because some people might say, what she mean by that? What do you mean? Isn't one of the first things that tourists come here looking for is what food they want to eat, right? Yep. And people keep revisiting the fact that the Gullah Geechees are the ones that brought the rice over.
They love the rice.
The okra over, the ones that brought the gooba, what y'all call a peanut here. All of this stuff, right? The seafood. Well, the cast nets, the bateau boat, we make those by hand. You find them in West Africa, right? Doing the same thing, same looking boats, same cast nets, everything. This sound.
But it's because we know
African.
We know the plantation records that for 10 years, slave traders, plantation owners in the United States, in the South, were making specific requests for people from the Windward Coast. Why? Because rice was domesticated by 1000 AD in the Niger River region.
Right, exactly.
This is all well documented, but they knew they didn't know anything about rice. So they wanted to get not only the people to produce the rice, but the knowledge system that goes with it, the basketry that goes with it. Race is intimately connected to capitalism, and it's been the thing that they have laid that foundation on forever. So, you know, the transatlantic slave trade just cements enslavement, or you know, that they use the Bible, unfortunately, to say, you know, some people will always be servants and slaves, and they actually use that to suggest, and people actually still in 2020 will say to me, well, they're better off than they would have been over there chasing an animal with a stick.
Are you serious? You actually hear people saying that to you?
Yes, they had kingdoms for thousands of years. 40% of the gold that went into Europe over from 1000 to 1400 came from Ghana. The rest came from Zimbabwe. People, but I always have students do this exercise at the beginning of the Africa course, and I say, what is the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word Africa? And I have them write that down, and then I say, what is one miscellaneous fact you can tell me about the continent? And then I have them go out and interview 10 people and ask them those same two things. And I tell them, don't be surprised if people act funny and weird to you over this. And and write that into your analysis. And they say, people, why are you asking me this? And when you say, do you know one fact, you know, one random fact about Africa? No one does, but what they do know is animals, the longest river. They know nothing about the people. They know nothing about the culture. And if we spend half as much time telling the truth about African history as we have spent burying it and making
burying it,
about it, we would be way ahead of the game. Because sustainability, like I was looking back at the article that, you know, the chapter in your book. I appreciate very much that you included that, because that chapter was commissioned by Collaborative Anthropology, the journal, to be in their initial journal, the initial publication.
Now you're talking about We Be Gullah Geechee? You're talking about this one, right?
Yes. They wanted to change so many things about that were in direct conflict with collaboration.
Right.
That I said, I'm not publishing it. Mm-hmm. So when you asked me to send you some things I was working on, I never dreamed that you would put it in there as one of the lessons, but that is such a reaffirming thing for me, because you know what I've been through. You know, you pay a price. When you advocate for people that don't look like you, they will treat you like that. But it is a gift. It is an honor to advocate for other people. It says that you're an intelligent human being. You understand we're all connected. And this idea of environmental sustainability,
but before you talk about environmental sustainability, let's clear up what you just said.
Okay.
You said when you advocate for people that don't look like you, they will treat you like that. What is that? And who are you really talking about here? Who's going to treat you like what? What are you, just detail, what do you mean by that statement?
Well, I talk a lot about white supremacy and assume that people don't understand what I'm saying. But if you look at the broad spectrum of racism and white supremacy, people just look at it in, well, I don't have a Confederate flag. They don't think about the systematic historical processes that have been laid in place in politics, in economics, in education. It is such a multi-pronged white supremacy, and the invention of race, the derogation of blackness as a cultural mainstay of all white cultures. All, quote, developed nations have this color complex that white people are supreme and that other people never really got to the point of a civilization. And all that comes from anthropological theory, this notion of cultural evolution, that, you know, people move through certain stages toward civilization, but who wrote the metric?
Right, for that, exactly. And who vetted that metric? Right.
In the Swahili coast of East Africa in the 1300s, they had indoor plumbing.
Thank you.
Okay, because they had a 1,000-year legacy of Indian Ocean trade, and they adapted their architecture to be able to host families who were coming on the monsoon winds. Mm-hmm. Students were blown away. What do you mean they had indoor plumbing? Everything that has been seen as the history of Africa has been a lie, but anthropology and other disciplines took that mantle up and carried it forward using physical anthropology, pouring BBs in people's skulls, and somehow magically more BBs always fit in white people's skulls until we realized that the Neanderthal was actually part of our lineage. They had much bigger brains than we had. And that had always been, they'd always been Neanderthals are ignorant, da, da. Well, when we actually have all that data and we realize their brains are bigger, well, how are you going to talk about that now, white people, when you have a 1,300 brain CC capacity and Neanderthals have 1,500, and you've represented them as someone who lives in caves and drags people around.
Right.
Scientists are a product of their social environment. There are a lot of disciplines and sort of parts of different disciplines that are inherently racist in the way they represent other people and in the way they acknowledge, this idea of white logic, this idea that, folk art. Look at Sam Doyle.
Yes. From St. Helena Island, he's a native artist, Geechee artist.
Look at Philip Simmons.
Right.
Brilliance beyond, chills. But they get called folk artist because they don't get attributed to high art because they're Black.
Right. Not because they didn't go to a university, but because God gave them the gift and they didn't need a university. So now they're relegated to some other category called folk instead of fine. But when you go to a white university, it's fine art.
Yeah. And equating culture with knowledge is the only way we get past that ignorance is, are you saying that, who did the Sistine Chapel? That's terrible. I can't remember that. Are you saying Michelangelo was somehow a much more complex person than Sam Doyle? Because that's not true.
Absolutely not. Right. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And it's interesting that you bring him up because it's his cousin that posed for this image that people like to attribute and call it Jesus when that is not Jesus. It's Michelangelo's cousin. And so that when you go back to talking about that one scripture out of the Bible that talks about servants in all ways obey your masters, and using that to indoctrinate people into believing all of the aforementioned things that you mentioned. And when you push back against these things and point out that even if we're talking about Christianity, it starts in Africa, it starts in Ethiopia. It doesn't start in Europe. And King James and those bastardized a lot of stuff and altered it and did all of these things. So the Nicene Council was not the initial scrolls of what we were practicing. So that's a whole nother dynamic that people don't give credit to the motherland for. And definitely when you start to push that and get into this world that I live in the Gullah Geechee Nation, and people say, well, how come, so many Gullah Geechees are Christian? Because we actually know the origin point is Africa, and we actually practice it in terms of a lifestyle, not a, quote, westernized religion. There's a difference there.
Not something attached to money.
There you go.
There's a great podcast because it's very hard to teach about Africa and not have the students look at it as a monolithic culture. You're talking about 30,000 years. You're basically talking about 10,000 years for sure of distinct things that happen across the continent. And it looks as though everyone is either Islamic or Muslim. And I said, Islamic or Christian. And I said, listen to me. Across all time and space, Africans have maintained their indigenous ideologies about spirituality, regardless of where they are in the continent and elsewhere. And this gentleman did a wonderful podcast for the Pan-African Congress that talked about being a Buddhist in Britain and sitting there as an African and saying, all of the tenets of Buddhism, this is all my culture.
It's culture. It's culture. Yeah, it's culture.
You are attached to your natural environment, that you are part of your ancestors, that all of these things that he said are common sense to me. But so we are the oldest, we have the oldest epistemology in the world. And I was like,
as Africans, we do. And so now let's go there, because all of this is something that when you said, well, they're going to treat you a certain kind of way. What kind of way have you been treated? I know you wrote this chapter called Race Traitor. I read it. I talk about it a lot. Why would you suddenly get called a race traitor? And who called you that? I guess some people listening to this conversation right now go, it's obvious, but maybe it's not to somebody else. Why were you called race traitor, and who first called you race traitor? Because if I remember correctly, it was people that lived in gated areas here in the Gullah Geechee Nation that labeled you with that, but it may go beyond that. Tell us about that part.
I think they I don't think they had a sophisticated sort of theoretical perspective to call me a race traitor, but they did always say they made it about, well, we're for everyone. You're for the Gullah Geechee.
What does that mean? So wait a minute. So the Gullah Geechee are not part of everyone. That's what that means. So the Gullah Geechee is separate from everyone. I thought every meant every, all things, all folks. But if the Gullah Geechee are separate from every, now we're getting into trying to understand what they talk about. Go ahead.
Well, because Gullah Geechee won't conform. I mean, any group that will not conform to U.S. mainstream culture is seen as a problem. And I think what they realized is I had been interviewing them, and they saw my allegiance or advocacy for Gullah Geechee as somehow, I mean, I've had students who don't like me. The very first thing is they say is, this woman wants to be black. This woman wishes she was black. This one, always. And I find that so interesting. It used to offend me. Now I just think it's funny. I want equality for all human beings, and we're all the same. Mm-hmm. And so that's a problem when people say,
that sounds like every.
That
sounds like every. That sounds more like every.
Why don't you advocate for Gullah Geechee?
Right.
The question isn't really why do I? That's where my knowledge base is. The question is, why don't you? And why do you see it as a problem for me to advocate for them? But what they realized was I wasn't part of their clique.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't be trusted anymore. Mm-hmm. So, because white people all know the plantation, the petition.
Yes, about stopping using the word plantation on gated areas in
there was 7,000 signatures on there, but what whiteness theory allowed?
10,000. It's just about at 10,000 now. It's just short of 10,000.
Because I'll tell you what I did is I printed out almost 600 pages and I analyzed all the comments. And there are about 45 people on there who live in gated communities named plantations. And they all say the same thing. I've been so embarrassed. I've lived here for 23 years and I've always had a problem. You've never had a problem. But now you're on blast, and that's what white people do. They find these convenient ways. If you had a problem with it for 23 years, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you go into, you know exactly why you were embarrassed, because it's ignorance. Because it represents that you think you're better than someone else. Because living in a place named plantation, in a place where people were enslaved and their knowledge was the commodity that built the South and built the port cities, it's unexcusable. It is, it is a black mark on the whole region. But they never went into any action to change it, but now all of a sudden that it's on them. Or people, literally 4 people said, I would have never thought about this.
Really? That's interesting.
That's that convenience of white privilege that you don't have to. Mm-hmm. You don't have to think about it, because it's not every single day that you deal with all of these, what they call that accumulation factor. You were talking about the people that are already going through COVID.
Right.
Now they're dealing with a hurricane.
Right.
It's that accumulation of inequalities and forces to make you not speak your language, and forces to make you not pour libation at a national Heritage Corridor Commission meeting.
Right.
Ignorant.
That nonsense, that we went through as well. At the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission meeting, they didn't want us to practice Gullah Geechee traditions or speak our own language there. Just like the Park Service doing a study and didn't want us to speak our language because they said the transcribers couldn't actually transcribe it. Well, take it down and let us transcribe it. But how dare you come in our community and say you're gonna listen to us and then not listen to us, but try to dictate to us like it's slavery time.
But I've realized why they said that. I've been asking white people ever since then. Pour libation. You ever heard of? And they think about the homies pouring out
liquor.
It doesn't matter what they pour out. It is a testament to how much you revere your ancestors. And how dare you take that, even if it's gangsters, even if it's people who've been shot in gang violence, they still honor their ancestors because they know that is where I came from. And how dare a huge power structure, a group of people that have
governmental power structure, right? Try to say that is something you cannot do.
You do not even know about. That's when I knew the Heritage Corridor would not make any difference, is because I realized, okay, they want these plantations so they can keep making money on them, and they want to control the story. They want it to be a one-dimensional story. That's what tourists love. The old South, where there were no black people that you could see, but they built everything that you see. They invented most of the things that you see. But somehow you're going to visit these places and learn about the plantation owner and how smart he was. No. And the way that they've changed those places from, Drayton Hall plantation. When you take the word off, you're not being ethically responsible. You're trying to tell part of a story, because you know that that story is really what needs to be told, and you're not courageous enough to tell that story.
It's like Magnolia Gardens, for instance. Like, it's called the Gardens. It's called Brook Green Gardens.
I'll guarantee you they talk to each other, they call it plantation.
Yeah, so that they could then literally surplant and then plant in people's minds a different construct other than that of enslavement. So that's the thing, is just because I eliminate the word doesn't mean I eliminate the history or our story of what actually happened on those lands, and that black gold was exploited on those lands. So here we are, all of these things, like you're talking about narratives have been constructed, narratives have been written, they've been published, the lost cause doctrine as part of the educational system.
The idea that Africans were so traumatized in the Middle Passage that they lost all their culture and forgot everything about themselves, that's asinine. I mean, if anything, and that's what I love most about Gullah language, is that you threw all these people together, because there were uprisings and the mechanisms of slavery and enslavement changed over time, because Africans are ingenious, and they would figure wherever there's oppression, there's resistance. And they did not go quietly. And so they figured out, okay, maybe we should put these Mandinkos with these Igbos with these, so they can't speak to each other.
Right.
And what did Gullah Geechee's forefathers do? They created a language, a bona fide linguistic system, much more complex than English. But try telling that to educators. I mean, plantation has to be eliminated in ideology and practice. Take it off the sign don't mean anything.
Right.
And that would make y'all feel better, white people. That would soothe your conscience. But the reality is, I think, and I wanted to get in touch with the person that put that on change.org. Let's see if these gated community people are willing to go back and look at the place that they live. And if it was acquired through a legal loophole called partitioning, let's make arrangements to give a portion of that property back to Gullah Geechee.
Right, and that's when we start talking about reparations. Right. And that's when we start talking about truly dismantling a racist system. Yeah. So let's talk about this, because you're an anthropologist, and a cultural anthropologist in particular. I want your take on this, because we talked about how race got constructed. We've talked about how it is your field of study that largely proliferated a lot of these ideas, and so-called halls of higher education have continued to proliferate misinformation in regard to people of African descent.
Archaeology mainly.
And archaeology too, yeah. And so here, let's talk about this. We are at another moment in time that one might say is a historic crossroad, where people are discussing the same things you and I have been discussing about the difference between saying, well, I'm not racist, and the difference between being anti-racist. All right. So let's talk about which one do we need to be dealing with. And we are going to say, well, race was constructed, which led to racism, and we want to dismantle racism. I know that you, just like I was invited to present for the World Conference Against Racism a couple of decades ago in South Africa. And so we're still at this point where we're at one might call it a tipping point, but I don't think so. I think we're on a trajectory. I just feel we're on this trajectory, that this moment in time had to come, where people had to finally get in the street and speak up and say, we're not for this previous system that America was built on. It's almost like we're at the gate of another U.S. Civil War, because we have people who are from the U.S. against others in the U.S. who want to dismantle still exploiting people of color, people of African descent, indigenous people, and others like yourself don't want to participate in that system. So what would you say at this moment it would take to dismantle racism? And do you think we only need to be dealing with this term about whether you're non-racist or whether you're anti-racist? And what would that mean to you? What do those terms mean in your world?
I think anti-racism is a conscious effort to do whatever it takes to bring about human equality, but that has to also be where you spend your money. Mm-hmm. I remember when I gave you I remember two distinct points in my life where I feel like I became an anti-racist, and that is I always wore a diamond. Rex, I was married for a long time. He went into debt to get me a diamond because that is the symbol of love. Right. At that time, as I am wearing that diamond, I'm in graduate school with Faye Harrison. Dr. Harrison is a world-renowned race scholar, and I never thought two times about that or the cowrie shells. Mm-hmm. When I learned the truth about diamonds, I sold it. I got rid of it. I couldn't wear it because
diamonds, right? About diamonds?
Because there's no such thing as non-conflict diamonds. Don't fool yourself, white people. They always created a convenient back door. There's no such thing as non-conflict diamonds in a continent where people have died and had their hands cut off over a stone that they don't even understand what the importance is to us. That was, and I remember Faye noticing and saying, I thought you had a diamond. I said, I got rid of it. She was like, I wondered when you would.
Interesting.
She knew what it represented and who I was. You tell people all the time who you are and what you represent by the things you do and do not support. The second time was with the cowrie shells, when I learned that they were a currency used to buy enslaved Africans. And so anytime anyone has them and they want to get rid of them, I say, I have someone I can send them to.
Yes.
To you, because these things matter. It matters. I think about Jabari talking about trying to get people to boycott Walmart for just one day. If Black people spoke, why isn't there a Black bank? Why?
Right.
And it isn't like they haven't tried to create one. What people don't understand, if they want a Black bank, they should have one. White people control all of those avenues, and we make it impossible, whether we realize it or not, for Blacks to have independent nationhood or support themselves. Because
let me pause right there because when we talk about here in the Gullah Geechee Nation, and you mentioned that's a critical point about making it difficult for people to have things. Well, many people who are watching, you might not be aware, but this is the land where the U.S. Civil War began. South Carolina was the first to secede from the Union. Okay. So right in Charleston, here in the Gullah Geechee Nation, this is when the so-called war of brother against brother, or as some Southerners still call it, the war of Northern aggression, started right here. And out of the Union winning, my people winning, getting in there and fighting and winning, there was also this bureau that came along, the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau eventually had sort of some of the members participate in this thing called the Freedmen's Bank, but there was this establishment of this bank actually by Anglo people and by the government. And what they did was money and stipends that what we'll call now the freedmen, whether you're a man or a woman, but you had been previously enslaved and now you were emancipated by Lincoln through the Emancipation Proclamation, they referred to us all as freedmen. Well, as my ancestors were saving money in order to buy land, to no longer be called chattel and property, but to own property, to sustain themselves on, there were also people in larger areas, like Charleston was one of the areas where Freedmen's Bank got set up here in the Gullah Geechee Nation. Well, come to find out, there were always white men who were on the board of the Freedmen's Bank. They that the previously enslaved African people deposited in that bank and
over 10 years,
in their own communities. Say that again, Dr. Hargrove, say it again.
Over 6 years, and they blamed it on the people that ran the bank and acted like it was Black people, but it wasn't. Du Bois Du Bois in
Reconstruction, written by W.E.B. Du Bois.
He makes that very clear. And who went to them today and told all of those freedmen who had worked so hard that their money was gone and there was no explanation?
Right. And now here Frederick Douglass, who is the great orator, is who came in trying to help them save face, trying to save the institution when it was already too late. He took his own personal money and invested it in there to try to get people to sustain that bank, and it fell apart. Fortunately, there are a few, very few, it's less than a dozen left, of Black-owned and operated banks in the whole of the United States. But many people in the Black community are afraid of putting their money in anybody's bank because of what is going on. I don't know if you noticed, but today there is a headline about how people woke up today and that their account said zero at Bank of America, one of the banks that participated in chattel enslavement. I don't know if you knew that, but that happened today. So even when we're talking about a pandemic, we're talking about economics, we're talking about America and that economic system, blocking Black people out of it. We could go into redlining, we could go into a whole lot of discussion. Maybe concern even as of today is how people put all this money in the bank, but then when they need their money back, they can't get it. And could you imagine working hard, diligently, all this time to store up something, to own land, to maintain your land ownership, to maintain paying your taxes, and wake up and find zero in your account, and you knew you had money in there?
No explanation.
Bank of America today feel my ancestors felt when the Freedmen's Bank failed all over the country, and they had taken all these people's money. They had duped them out of their money. So that's why there's still a distrust of the so-called American capitalist society. And as you said, all this racial construct, racism and capitalism are together.
Well, they suck in some people. There's a great book called How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America by Manning Marable, and he goes systematically through society and shows how in politics, you know, John Lewis, God bless the dead.
Yes.
Very few people are willing to take the hit that it takes to actually push change through, because it has to be a sustainable endeavor that will benefit the communities you act like you're trying to help.
Right. And you have to actually do something to really help them. So on that note, like you saying, just like everybody else, Hill Harper and others have said, so being anti-racist doesn't just mean I don't own a Confederate flag, or I don't say the N-word. I don't, like you said, it's economic. It's about your actions. It's about you being involved in these protests. It's about you even being that voice in that corporate office that says you will not participate in racist hiring practices. You will not participate in trying to undermine the Black co-worker in the office, or
who you know deserves the promotion that John's getting. We all sit in the, that's what the negative worker was about in that, you know, Nancy Shepherd Hughes wrote about using your position to better other people. If you are in a place and you see that this person's getting passed over for a promotion because she's loud and Black, and you go along with that, you can't ever say you're not a racist. You're a racist. If you make comments in a university faculty meeting about students of color having a hard time writing, if that's a consideration, you're a professor. Don't be afraid that kid's going to be mad at you. Help them. Teach them to write. Give them the tools to change their destiny.
There we go. Right there, give them the tools.
Give them the tools.
Now, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because again, historically, when we talk about Reconstruction, you know full well, because you've seen some of them, you know the Knights of Wiseman Hall is here on St. Helena. Unfortunately, it's still Gullah Geechee owned. The Farmers Co-op building is still here, and we have a Gullah Geechee Farmers Co-op, still Gullah Geechee owned. These are places and spaces with our secret societies that we had to develop back during Reconstruction in order to provide each other literally with field tools. Literally, so that people could farm their land. And so even owning land today is a revolutionary act for anybody who is Black. not owning a house with a mortgage, because that tied you back to that banking system. I'm talking about a fully paid for, the deeds in your name piece of property is when you can say you own it. Otherwise, the bank can call it in. They can call you on it like you playing poker, and you could lose everything you got. And so it's critical that when we talk about this system working against us, we do have mechanisms that have worked for us, but you have to come to the foundation. Here in the Gullah Geechee Nation, people are still living on that foundation, still living on owned land, outright owned land, just having to fight for our taxes. But as we've talked about, the political system still tries to do things. Forced partition sales, has to try to zone you out of property in places. Eminent domain is used. There's a lot of topics that we'll end up talking about on other episodes with some of my lawyers about that on Zooming In. But we want to at least get your mind straight on all these things and how they connect. When you hear systemic racism, systemic system, it is a whole unit of things that go together, from education to economy and all of these things. So it's your job to make conscious decisions of who you support, what you support, and not hiding that. Being upfront and honest with the people you're around, that's your peer group, that's your family, to say, I'm not ashamed that I do support Black businesses. I'm not ashamed that I support Black organizations. I'm not ashamed that I do not want to be racist. I might have been raised that way, but I don't want to continue to be racist.
That's not a part of my Constitution. That's what I learned. That's what I learned. I mean, when I think about Gullah Geechee, and I should be clear that when I talk about Black communities in the United States, unfortunately, I see them going through lots of things that I don't see your community having to go through as much, because you have been away from them. Like the idea of the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor being them saying they've retained their culture, they've retained their language, and they always talk about they were isolated. Isolated from what? Isolated from white supremacist practices and logic. Mm-hmm. I mean, zoning laws are white supremacy. Urban renewal is white supremacy. Banking, white sheriff's sale, legal loopholes. It's how white people continue to manipulate a system to stay in a place that they think they deserve. And as long as they don't see that, as long as, you know, buying sweatshop labor is inherently contributing to racial inequality in the world. Where are things made? Sweatshops from brown and Black people.
Right.
So, right. I mean, across your day, you have to think about the things. And I know if people were able to do the things Gullah Geechee have been able to do, to own land, to not have to interface with white people, they would accomplish the same things.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's
what white people accomplished all over the world against the odds. What would they do if they could do the things inherently, you know, coalition building, community owned things? I think that's why they launched the National Park Study, Special Resource Study, because you spoke in Switzerland at the United Nations.
Yeah, they weren't doing it before that. See, you were here, so thank you for telling the truth of the story, that you know that law was already on the floor of Congress and could not get passed, would not get passed. There was no, Congressman Clyburn was walking to rooms and playing golf with people, doing all he could, and could not get them to pass that thing. We had to go through 2 different terms that we had to go for 6 years. We finally got it into law. And guess who signed it? President George W. Bush. But why did they even go into it? It was after I went to United Nations Human Rights Commission and spoke out against the human rights violation that had happened from the time of chattel enslavement up to that moment, April 1st, 1999. And that has not stopped. We have been targeted. We've been censored in the media. We've had a whole lot of things happen since that law passed to say, don't discuss self-determination, don't follow Queen Quet, don't cover her.
In 1920, you know, the Workers' Party in 1928, their international agenda was Black national liberation. Mm-hmm. They believed that the Black people in the Black Belt, which of course would encompass all of the islands, all the way around the United States, all the way through Louisiana. Right. The only reason when people would not sign on for seeing that as a nation, their drawback was they don't speak their own language, but they did speak their own language.
They did, right, exactly.
Languages in all those places. So if we look back at the Communist Party in 1928, they saw very clearly what had to happen was independence, was nationhood, like the Maori, like, you know, Native Americans. And that doesn't mean anything in terms of your quality of life. Unfortunately, we've seen Native Americans being seen as Native Americans, you know, hasn't changed their, you know,
the status in the terms of, because, you know, with the reservations, we got to get a government strategy of genocide. Yeah, we're going to put you a certain place, and that's not the place where your culture really developed. We're going to shift you over here so you can't live the same lifestyle, which is why we're still fighting to hold on to Gullah Geechee land. And I thank all of you who've been listening, who have been supporting us, that you have given donations at Cash App, $ Gullah Geechee Nation. You've given donations at the GoFundMe link of the Gullah Geechee Land and Legacy Fund. But look at it. Look at the economics of it. We haven't reached 20,000. And we've been pushing this for years. Now, if we were talking about some Black person being murdered in the street, we would probably reach 20,000 in a few minutes, not in a few years. Why somebody got to die for you to support Black people? That should not be the measure. That should not be the measure. But supporting Black sustainability on Black-owned land and Black self-determination, meaning we have our own governing body and we'll lead ourselves, and we are not hurting nobody else, we ain't hindering nobody else, we just saying let we be we and things like that. And so why is that so difficult to support? Why don't maybe you answer that question for me and give me any last words you want the audience to understand about how they can be active participants in supporting not just the Gullah Geechee Nation, but supporting dismantling systemic racism.
Put your money where your mouth is, and be willing to support, like being out in the street, walking for the civil rights. I've heard people talk about like this is a second civil rights movement. People died.
They did.
I mean, yeah, we've been shot by rubber bullets, but they blew up churches. Right. They killed little children. What people went through in the civil rights movement, how dare anyone suggest that you out walking with a sign with your kids? White people have got to do, walking is fine, whatever. They need to put their money into, if you just started supporting one single thing, and like everyone said when I started working with you, you'll never get an anthropology job. You work with local people. You know, I've always just stayed true to what you've told me, and that is do what you know is right. You know, and you in the book where you talk about, I said, I said, Queen has been my interlocutor, and that initially because she demanded it, today because I recognize my role. Mm-hmm. You're not here as a white person to save anyone. That whole mentality is screwed up. You may be lucky enough to support an institution of a minority group that you learned something from. Mm-hmm. You'll get way back. You may put millions of dollars in, but I promise you, our culture is bereft of these traditional things that have kept people, that have sustained people. So there's a cultural sustainability that if your economics, your political influences, your education, if your children's school teaches wrong things about Africa, go tell someone, demand that they change the curriculum. It has to be in social forces, in the criminal justice system. If you can't see that all of these things are state-sanctioned violence, just like lynching, sitting on someone's neck is white supremacist notions of these people are not even human. Like
three-fifths of a human being.
So if you're not openly against that, you're not anti-racist. But you have to be able to put yourself on the line and do things, regardless of the consequences. I mean, Dave Chappelle is always someone that I look to because he has suffered a lot. And when I didn't get tenure at UNF, I thought I'd suffered. And I realized these are all just things. It's just all part of knowing what I need to do and knowing what my role is, and I'm very honored by my role, whatever I can do to bring about human equality. But I learned the things that make me who I am from Gullah Geechee culture. And I think, you know, I'm forever indebted. And I think if people just stopped and listened and learned, they would see why, you know, it would be a tidal shift in this country to start putting our money into black newspapers, into things that have been completely wiped off the map because white people are so afraid. I mean, when you outlaw the ability to send the Du Bois's the crisis across a state line,
right. Yeah, that's
make it a federal offense to send the crisis across state lines, you are obviously afraid of something.
Very threatened. You're very threatened. And even when you mentioned about the newspapers, my viewers here, many of you saw Christopher Everett, the maker of Wilmington on Fire, who is raising money now for Wilmington on Fire Chapter 2. And that's where that whole story begins, because Alex Manley was a Gullah Geechee in Wilmington, North Carolina, who had a newspaper, who actually wrote against all of this racism and wrote that it was a lie that any black man had raped a white woman, and they came for him, and they came for the whole town, and they came for all the black leaders, and they tried to destroy all of them physically and financially.
The truth always comes out, though. He was right. If you look at the Chicago Independence Project, 900 people have been exonerated through genetic testing, and 95% of them are black men who have spent decades in jail from a witness testimony that they raped a white woman. The fear in white people is really what they have to deal with. I mean, just ignorance. I think
that's it right there.
You have to make anti-racism a position of intelligent, educated people. I tell my students, if you're racist, you're not intelligent. You may leave here with 5 degrees, but there's an inherent knowing that all people have created beautiful things, and that this melanin indicator of human worth, it really hurts us more than it does anybody else. And that's the guy who, the gentleman from Charleston, who said these people created this system to try to create the society they wanted. Unfortunately, they didn't realize that it hurt their society more than it did the people.
Right, exactly, because you sure didn't hurt us, and I'm so happy that you were here and that you learned from us, and how for acting thing like that and thing like that. We like to say man is going to take on where money can't, and so for years we've taught a lot of proverbs to you. You've ate a lot of our food while you were here, and help you dry up them tears and tell you, girl, come on here, the truth ain't gonna kill you. And so we're glad that it didn't, and we're happy that you are a truth teller, that you are out here making sure that people learn from your experiences. And we appreciate you being an ally and being part of continuing to support the work of the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition in a myriad of ways over the years. And especially for those who are really intrigued by this conversation, please go to gullahgeechee.biz, gullahgeechee.biz, and you can obtain this book there. And so that this way you can read a lot more, not only about what Dr. Hargrove wrote and what I've written in it, but how others in the Gullah Geechee Sustainability Think Tank have written about their own experiences getting into the field, getting into the water, and keeping our culture sustained here. But we wrote it as an anthology about collaboration, because that's what it takes. The Gullah Geechee Nation came about because Africans and Indigenous Americans collaborated to keep themselves alive and to keep their cultural traditions alive. And so this book is coupled with this one. This one is now a collector's item. And this is one of the most used books on Gullah Geechee research, next to Lorenzo Dow Turner's Africanisms in the Gullah dialect. I found that out because one of my students, who's now a professor now too, did his work on his bibliography and then found that out for me. And I was really stunned to find out this is in the top 5 Gullah Geechee books of all time. And so I'm looking for this one to be there as well. But these are bookends. This will give you a lot more information on the background of the African people we've been talking about today that make up Gullah Geechee cultural heritage. This one gets you started in the past. This one picks up and leads you into the future, shows you what it is that you need to do if you want to collaborate. And
let me
support cultural capital.
For people who are in academia, they are hemorrhaging money for inclusion and diversity, which means get yourself into the apply for grants to do those things. Even if you don't work in Black communities, I guarantee you, you have a Black community near you if you're in an institution that needs to be documented, that needs some empowerment, that needs to be using the resources at your institution. If you're an artist, there's humanities grants. There's no vocation on the planet that you can't use your position as an anti-racist model for other people. Look at the grants that are available to you. If you're a business owner, if you own a bank, you can do all kinds of engagement activities that make white people feel better, but you can do them in a way that actually brings about,
real change. And instead of giving us change, we'd like you to make change, okay? Make some real change and give us some dollars, okay? So that's what we need you to do. So that's your charge as we leave this week. And I'm so happy that y'all have had a chance to be a part of this dialogue. Dr. Hargrove and I have driven all up and down places, have been to all kinds of meetings and had similar dialogues before. And I'm so happy that she is here to get us started this Black August with really discussing what it is that we can do collectively and collaboratively to dismantle racism. I want to thank the folks at UMN and our Create Fellowship for being part of this collaboration. Some might say co-conspirators even in this process, right, of dismantling racism. People often call us that. And so we've been speaking out about this way before the protests actually poured out into the streets. And we want to send out power, love, peace, blessings to everybody that literally, really is sincerely fighting for equality, fighting for equity. And we know that we can dismantle racism and create a system that recognizes, represents, and respects all people of the world, all people's cultures, not just one race. All right. So thank you for tuning in. I'm Queen Quet, Chiefess and Head of State for the Gullah Geechee Nation. So happy that you, as we say, Hunter taught them not robbery, but join me again today, but zooming in on sustainability. Now let's get out there and do the work and dismantle racism. Once again, please go to the GoFundMe link for the Gullah Geechee Land and Legacy Fund. You can make a donation there. You can also send in donations to $ Gullah Geechee Nation, GULLAHGEECHEENATION. You can also follow Gullah Geechee Nation on Facebook and follow GullahGeecheeNation.com. That's our blog. And you can follow on Twitter and Instagram at Gullah Geechee. Ain't no I in Geechee if it a we. All right. So please follow us. All right. And definitely support us sustaining our own culture, our own cultural community, and take a stand for Gullah Geechee land. This will help us to sustain ourselves. And so we thank you for taking the opportunity to be an active part of this. Go on out there, dismantle racism. Let's get it together. Let's stand together and let's represent everybody equally. Peace and blessings, everybody.
Thank you.